Hey guys, in today's video, I am going to teach you how to get started on the bass flute. If you have not seen my last video, make sure to check it out. I do a comparison and a demo of the black nickel Trevor James bass, as well as their silver-plated version, which is behind me right here. That way you can hear a direct comparison of the two. Also, I wanted to mention that if you're flute shopping, or maybe you're bass shopping today, make sure to use my code Gina on the Flute Center of New York's website and you'll receive free shipping, an extended trial, and an extended warranty, as well as 10% off of all of their sheet music. Anyway, if you want to do a trial of this one right here or this one, I would highly suggest doing that. Try them out, see which one sounds best and that you like the most. If you do have your own bass flute already, congratulations, and let's get started with this video. Before you start the bass flute, one thing that you should know is you shouldn't start bass until you are very solid with your embouchure and your technique on the regular flute. This also goes for piccolo and alto flute. The reason why is because your embouchure is going to change when playing the bass flute. Also, a little bit of your technique is going to change as well. And so basically all the hard work that you did on your C flute is going to get all messed up, and then you're never going to be able to be consistent with either your regular C flute playing or your bass flute playing. So learn that first, get very comfortable with that. If you happen to have a private teacher, ask them, am I ready to learn the alto, bass flute, piccolo, whatever it may be, and rely on that. If you don't have a private teacher, just make sure that on flute you have a very solid embouchure, that you're not like trying to find a good positioning still. You can consistently make a good sound out of the instrument. You are no longer learning notes and fingerings, you're very solid with that. And then at a certain point, you can actually start the bass flute. Anyway, okay, let's get into how to get started with the bass flute. Okay, the first thing that we're going to talk about is placement. Just like the alto flute, there are kind of two different types of placement for the head joint on the bass flute. So the first one is like this, very much on top of the keys. A lot of other people do play like this. They'll roll this part up a little bit more, but they'll be playing like this. I find it much easier to play when my head joint is almost parallel with my keys. So try that out, see what feels the most comfortable to you. Now, in terms of the crutch, which is this part right here, alto flutes obviously don't come with them and neither do regular C flutes. So what you do is you put them here, push them all the way in, and then you screw this in until it is nice and tight. Trevor James actually comes with two different sizes, so whatever feels most comfortable for you, use that one. Anyway, so that is how that lines up. In terms of the foot joint, you're going to need to roll that inwards quite a bit in comparison to a regular flute because you need to be able to actually reach these keys. When you're starting out on the bass flute, make sure not to do it in more than 5 to 15 minute intervals, and that is because the bass flute is so much heavier than the regular flute and you don't want to injure yourself. So build up the strength and the consistency with that, and then you will be able to play for longer, but still you're going to have to take a lot more breaks with the bass flute than what you do with regular flute. One thing that I like to do, and I do the same thing with alto actually, is if I have to learn a lot of music on the bass flute, is I will actually learn it on C flute first. Do most of the practicing on C flute, and then at the end transfer it to bass flute, and that will make things a lot easier on you. In terms of fingerings, by the way, if you should know how to play the flute already, so bass flute has the same fingerings, so that's awesome. A lot of people also ask, is it in the same key? It is in C, so you won't have to do any transpositions like you would for the alto flute, so that makes things a lot easier. But it sounds an octave lower than what is written on the page. So instead of a G within the staff, it'll sound like this. And a D right below the staff sounds like this. So let's move on to the embouchure. The embouchure is going to be so much more relaxed than flute. Also, your aperture hole is going to have to be larger given it's a bigger instrument, right? So I will tell you, I'll be honest with you, the first time I played bass flute was when I was in high school. I tried out for the high school flute choir at the National Flute Association convention, and I made it. And one of the pieces I had to play bass flute. I had never played bass before. They had one there for me to do. And in the first rehearsal, I couldn't make a sound out of the bass flute. And what I realized is I was trying to still play it with the same embouchure as my regular C flute, and you just have to really relax so much. And that's, again, why you don't want to start on the bass flute until you're really comfortable and you have like those habits formed on the regular C flute, because this is going to totally mess with your embouchure otherwise. So you just have to totally relax your embouchure. A lot of the advice that I'm going to give you today is very similar to what it would be if you were playing the alto flute, but it's just even more so. So relax that embouchure and just really blow a ton of air into the instrument. Think about it. There is so much more of the instrument and tubing that your air actually has to go through than a regular C flute. So you have to push way more air. That being said, you also have to breathe a lot more frequently. So you might get a little winded, especially when you first start playing. Just so you're aware, sit down, you'll be fine, I promise. One thing that you can get, I don't have one personally, but I've seen them and I know that they are very helpful, is there's a crutch that you can put on your lap, and then it holds your bass up like this, and it just alleviates some of the pressure and the weight of the bass flute. So that might be something interesting for you to look into. Another thing that you're going to want to do is really open your jaw. Open that cavity up a lot, and that is going to help you produce a really full sound on the bass flute. When you very first start playing bass, don't worry about the really low notes, don't worry about the really high notes. Concentrate more on the middle register. That is a really good area to be focusing on. Obviously on the bass flute, the keys are massive in comparison to flute, and there is a lot more distance between when the key is not pushed and pushing it down. So you are not only having to cover more distance, it's more force that you're going to have to use. Don't push too hard, of course, but there's going to be a lot more effort that you have to exert in order to push each key down. And that's going to take some getting used to, especially to make it sound even. You don't want something to sound something like this. Notice that these two fingers did not go down at the same time. That is what you're looking for. So you're going to have to do exercises to learn this new technique on the bass flute. I would suggest starting with the basics, so scales. So maybe start on an E major scale. That way you can really concentrate on the placement of your embouchure and how much effort it takes to move between each note and everything like that, and really get used to the bass flute. Starting with the basics is basically going to retrain your fundamentals that you learned on a flute and apply them to the bass flute. And another exercise that I like to do is you start on a B, and so on and so forth. So B, B flat, B, A flat, and you slur between those because that way you can notice the actual placement of your embouchure and everything going on here, as well as your fingers, and you can make sure it's seamless. And then you do the same thing going up the scale. So starting on a B, and so on and so forth. On the bass flute, you're really going to have to exaggerate everything that you do. So that goes for dynamics, articulations, your tuning, everything like that. I would highly suggest for you to work with a tuner once you feel more comfortable with the instrument and you can do those interval leaps pretty easily. That way you can find the problem spots on the instrument. As you know, all flutes are not perfect in terms of tuning, so that way you can make those adjustments and so that everything can be played in tune. My last tip for you is something that I learned and it has changed my life. Literally. It's just made things so much easier. So when you're trying to get notes out in the low register, One thing that you can do, let's say you're playing a low E, it's just sometimes really hard to get the air started on these low flutes. And one way to do that is to actually put a key down when you start playing, and it kind of helps jumpstart the note. So to give you an example, low E like this, you can pick any finger that you want to. Usually I won't do the lowest note, the E fingering. So either like the F or the G, and I'll start with the key actually up. And when I start the note, I push it down and it helps jumpstart that note. So you have to get used to this so that you don't have something like this happen. And you also don't want it to be too hard. It would sound like this. Sounds a little ridiculous unless you're going for that technique, I suppose. So you just have to get used to it, but it really helps because otherwise it just kind of sounds like wah. It's just so hard to get those low notes out sometimes. It just makes it a little bit cleaner and easier for those low notes to pop out. So practice that and then you'll get used to doing it. As far as the low notes and the high notes, the biggest mistake that people make is that they push really hard and they tighten their embouchure. You need to do the absolute opposite of that. So relax it as much as possible. I know it seems a little counterintuitive, but you just relax as much as possible. And then that way you're able to get those low notes out and the high notes out and have them actually sound halfway decent. So just really relax and open that jaw. Make sure that there's a lot of room between your top teeth and your bottom teeth. And then the same thing in the high register. In the high register on bass flute, it's gonna sound a little bit more airy than flute. Flute is supposed to kind of be played in the high register too. Bass flute, it's more of an effect if you're going to be playing the really, really high register like that. It is possible, but it is going to sound a lot more airy. But again, in order for it not to sound like this, I'm pinching, and that's why the sound sounds like that. So if you're sounding like that and you're frustrated, just open and relax as much as possible. It's going to make it sound a lot more open and a lot less pinched and squeaky. Again, if you want to hear me demo the black nickel bass and the silver plated bass, I have that video, so make sure to go check that out. Thank you again to the Flute Center of New York for making this series possible. Make sure that you subscribe to my channel and follow me on Facebook and Instagram, and I'll see you soon.